welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jessica. I am really happy to be here today, and I have an amazing co-host with me. Could you please tell everyone who you are?
Hello, everybody. This is Melissa.
And we are here. First of all, I have to say, since we began a library podcast in 2018, we had no idea what this was going to grow into. And we've had the opportunity to basically chat with amazing people just throughout the entertainment industry. And now we're sitting here with one of the, I would say, one of the most successful podcast producers and podcasters ever. I mean, we've been consuming your media since you've been putting it out, and we're so grateful to have it here. And as soon as we saw that Cabinet of Curiosities was going to be released into some sort of book form, I think Melissa was the first person to be like, do you think he talked to us? So thank you so much, and welcome, Aaron Mahnke. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. Thank you for having me here.
So tell us just a little bit about yourself and about this book before we jump into it.
Yeah, I'm a lover of very weird history. That's pretty much a good summation of who I am. My grandmother was a librarian, so the world of books and libraries in particular are very dear to my heart. And I explored a lot of my interest in weird history in the library under her watchful eye when I was in grade school and middle school. And yeah, that it kicked off from there. And that's led to me doing what I do today, which is running a number of podcasts that are all sort of centered on weird history and or using weird history to tell their stories. And Cabinet of Curiosities is the reason why we're chatting today. That's my second podcast that started about 6.5 years ago. But I got my start with a show called Lore, which is sort of a intersection of history and folklore, and it's been going for almost 10 years now. And it's just been a blast to learn about these stories and to tell them to others.
So would you say that your love for the bizarre began with your grandma and exploring the library? Did you read lots of Guinness Book of World Records or Ripley's Believe It or Not, or where did it all begin?
Yeah, books like that were so it was like Ripley's Believe It or Not, the Guinness Book of World Records sometimes. When I was growing up as a kid in the 80s, there were infomercials on TV for I think it was Time Life books, The Mysteries of the Universe. And it was almost like an encyclopedia set. It was 20 volumes, and my mom never let me get them. Of course, they were wildly expensive. Now that I do this for a living, I have for fun gone and collected a couple of those sets just to have them because my childhood self wanted to own them. For me, it actually started back in, I think, like fifth grade when I found a book in a Scholastic Readers Club catalog, which was sort of like the gateway for so many kids my age into reading. And it was a book, I think, called Strange But True. And it was positioned as a book full of true stories that were also strange. And I loved that hook. I loved that angle. And that was the thing that really got me. So after I found that and fell in love with weird stories, everything else just sort of, became attractive to me. The Time Life books, the Ripley's Believe It or Not. Yeah, those were fantastic.
Those books were such a touchstone for my own weirdness, I have to say. I remember being homesick and seeing the commercials for them during the day, but between whatever show I was watching, I don't know,
Mm.
reruns of Three's Company or Unsolved Mysteries, all these things that kids my age watched when they were sick. But they really freaked me out and at the same time made me want to learn more.
Yeah.
So I'm thrilled to hear how many other people they touched, because I think there's a lot of us out there who were inspired by them. One thing I really want to know in general, as a podcaster, it's no surprise that these books are read in such a great rhythm. How much adaptation goes from script form to print form? And did you read these stories aloud before you decided which ones were going to be included in the collection?
It's funny when I write for any of my shows, I actually read things out loud as I write them, partly because that's my finish line. That's where I'm headed with the material that I'm creating. So it has to roll off my tongue properly. So I will frequently, it's why I can't write in a coffee shop. I have to write at home because I'm constantly reading the words off the page out loud and saying to myself, oh, that was actually too many hard consonants in a row. I should probably adjust the word I chose for that, just so it sounds better. It sounds smoother. Um, so that's the whole reading out loud thing starts with the writing process all the way through to being in the sound booth and recording the stories. For this book in particular, for the cabinet book, knowing that there are, I think, close to 1,400 stories at this point after 6.5 years, and we were going to fit in a little less than 200 of them into this book, I had to figure out how to pick the ones that we start with. And for me, it was about going to the beginning and grabbing not the first 200 stories, but a lot of the tales that are in this book are from the early days of the podcast, where we were grabbing stories that I had loved for years and needed a place to put them, and the podcast became that place. So there's a lot of really fun ones in the book, that tick that box for me. Also, I saw the book as an opportunity to curate the stories, because right now with 1,400 of them, and almost impossible to go onto a podcast app and search for what was that episode about the such and such. You're just not going to find that. It's impossible. I have to search my hard drive using Spotlight on my Mac and try to track down what script it's in. It's really, really difficult to find them. So putting them into a curated book where they're in categories helps. And then the fact that my publishers went further and put a index in the back just made it so much better. That's the chef's kiss moment of this book, is that I can look things up by keyword and find the stories that I need. So that's some of the decision making that went into the book for sure.
Did you sometimes find it challenging to choose which category the stories would fall into? Because some of them
Yeah.
could be
Yeah,
multiple.
they
Yeah.
could. Yeah, there are some where it's like that is a coincidence, but it's also a military story, or it's
Yeah.
it's the invention of something, but it's also a mystery, and so yeah, it was tricky. It was tricky, and that some of the categories have more tales in them than others, but at the end of the day, I had to kind of step back and say, what does this story make me feel like? Like what category does it? Does it feel like a military story, or does it feel more like a cool animal story? And you have to pick and choose.
And I have to say, I loved in the introduction when you mentioned the Enlightenment Room at the British Museum and your experience
Mm.
there. And I also love the idea of categorizing the tales to place them in context with one another to see a bigger historical picture. So I thought that really had a lot of value to it. And to be able to read a book as opposed to just listen to the podcast, to have a physical copy of the stories and see them and explore them and experience them in that very physical way.
I agree. I mean, I'm talking to librarians, so I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but I love organizing my content. Like, I love the idea that you can walk into a library and at the very least, all the mystery books are over there, or the young adult is in this section. Like, there's categories, and it makes the search easier. And I love museums for that too. I love walking through a museum and knowing that I'm in the ancient Assyrian section, or I'm walking through the impressionist painting section, because I'm not going to expect anything different. I get to explore that category and go deep and say, oh, I didn't know this particular artist was also part of this movement. But because they're curated together, it helps me connect the dots better. I think that at the end of the day, if I was to take my whole career and put it into one word, I think it's context. I think that you can tell a story. Anybody can tell stories, but when you start to connect it with context, it acts like that 3D glasses that you get handed when you go to the movie theater and you're going to watch a 3D movie, which would look weird without the glasses, but once you put them on, everything comes to life. And I think context does that for us. I think it really helps us see things in a new light, and it makes the story more powerful. So if I can provide context by categorizing stuff in the book, then I feel like I've helped the reader get a better experience because of that.
Absolutely. And I also love that the punchline of every story in the podcast and in the Cabinet of Curiosities book, the story's about somebody incredibly famous and historic. Like, it's
Yeah,
not just
yeah,
some random guy on the street. It's like, oh, this is about Napoleon. Like,
right.
it's just incredible. And it's so much fun to explore the whole story and then at the end get that surprise.
Yeah, that's a some people remember him, some people don't. I think it's a generational thing. But when I was growing up, there was a radio guy named Paul Harvey, and he had this show on the radio called The Rest of the Story. And I think that he was limited by what they call the radio clock. He had a segment that was probably 3-4 minutes long, and that's what he had to work within. But he would tell a story, and it was pre-written. He read it into the mic, just like I do. You write it and then read it. And he often hid things from the listener. He hid the real first name. He'd use a nickname, or he would use somebody's maiden name, and then hide some details until the very end, and then kind of pull the curtain back at the very last moment, and you were just left stunned. Like, how can that person be the one that I was just learning about? And I think that while Strange But True made me a lover of really weird stories and history, it was Paul Harvey that really turned me on to a particular storytelling voice. This idea that if you just hold a few things back, you're not lying to the listener, but you're trying to tell the story more effectively. You're using their interest and their curiosity, and, well, who is he talking about, to stick with it and bring them along. And because of that, there are classrooms all across the country now who play episodes of Cabinet of Curiosities for their grade school kids because they're short, they fit their attention span, and they leave them wondering till the very end, what are we talking about? And I think I think it demonstrates how powerful of a storyteller Paul Harvey was, and how much I I admire and have kind of pulled him into my DNA as a storyteller.
I have to ask, some of the stories are simply beyond belief. Have you considered yourself a skeptic? Um, was there anything that you came across in particular? There's definitely one in my mind that I'm just like, no way. But was there anything that you came across in particular that you really second guessed a bit? You're just like, this is really interesting, but is this even possible?
Yeah, this ties into my favorite category in the book, which is coincidences. And I think they make for really great stories. At the same time, they sometimes make for stories that cause you to wonder, could that actually have happened? One of my favorites is the story of the production crew building the wardrobe for the Wizard of Oz movie that we grew up with. Judy Garland, and which wasn't the first movie adaptation, but it's obviously the most well known. And obviously, the Wizard of Oz is based on the books by L. Frank Baum. And Wicked is having its moment right now, and I'm super glad for that. But when they were filming the Judy Garland version, as the story goes, they were looking for the perfect top coat for the wizard. He is in the title of the movie. Let's make sure that he's dressed perfectly. And they found a secondhand top coat in a Hollywood, thrift store, and brought it back. And I'm sure they do a lot of things to get it up to snuff for being on film, cleaning it at least, if not, fitting it for the actor who's going to wear it. And in the process, they found a label inside that said LFB, L. Frank Baum. And I know that the story isn't an invention of the last couple of decades, because the movie marketing team used that story while the movie was brand new and coming out to sort of show how magical the movie actually was. Look at this amazing coincidence that gave us this wardrobe. Is it true? I don't know that we'll ever be able to fully know for sure, but it's a story that's existed since the inception of the movie. So at the very least, it's brilliant marketing, but I want to believe that it actually happened. The world was a little smaller back then. I think the chances were maybe greater that somebody could stumble on the coat back then. So that's where I'm at on that. In general, I tend to ride the fence. I think that if I come in fully skeptical, it probably won't make me a good storyteller of weird and unusual things. And if I come in a full believer on the weird stuff, it would probably scare away all the skeptics who would just think that I'm a wacko at a nut job. So thankfully, my personality is, I'm undecided. I want to hear each story independently, and I'll probably come up with a personal opinion about them, but they're fun to tell regardless.
From one open-minded skeptic to another, I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm so curious, where do you start your research process, and where is your favorite source to just go down the rabbit hole? Because it seems like you have endless stories, and I'm so curious where you pull content from, and then where do you go to take that next step?
Well, each story sort of has its own like a research flavor, I suppose. One might be a hyper local event that happened, and for that you want to go into a newspaper archive, which makes me remember sitting in my grandmother's library at the library she managed, not her home library, going through the microfiche machine when I was in 1988 or something. And thankfully, it's a little bit easier today. You can go on newspapers.com and you can go deep into the papers, and they've got great search features. Even though they're images of newspapers, you can search and highlight the text. So those are helpful. Sometimes it's a matter of just reading the biographies of certain individuals, or the invention story of things that we take for granted, and finding the right way to tell that story, finding the pieces that you can hold back, the pieces that you can give up front, that kind of a thing. um this is a weird one, but a lot of people know that Wikipedia is a great place to go for like a general overview of a topic. You can read an article on the whatever, pick an event or a person or a place. But they also have a whole list of just lists. You can go on there and they actually have lists of lists. So you can search for lists of X, Y, and Z. And one fun kind of morbid list is strange and unusual deaths, like weird deaths. And a lot of stories have come out of things like that. And, the list might just be a sentence that says, in 1862, such and such happened to so-and-so. And then you say, well, now I need to know more. Like, why in the world did that happen? And so you start digging in all the sources you have available and looking for it. Thankfully, with Cabinet, we don't have to go super deep. We have 2 pages to tell a story. It's about 800 or 900 words. So I don't need to write a, master's level history paper. For lore, we really go a lot deeper. Our source list is frequently between 50 to 80 books or articles. We go into scholarly journals and really dig deep into concepts. My research team will take like a full week or 2 weeks on a lore episode and just really make sure that we have all the context, all the pieces to tell the story well. But it depends on the show. It depends on the story and the way that we want to approach it. Yeah.
In preparation for today, I started rewatching the Lore Amazon series.
Mm.
And oh man, that episode with the lobotomy, I'm still thinking about it. I was so creeped out, and the actors and the way it was portrayed, it's just phenomenal. It's just so creepy and it's so well done. And there's so much information that you would never even think was out there.
Yeah, yeah. I love that they did that episode in black and white too. That
Oh,
was
so
really
good.
perfect for it. Yeah.
You've grown such an amazing empire in Grim and Mild. Were you always an entertainer at heart? And how do you curate your own cabinet of curiosities in the series that you produce?
Yeah, I've been I don't know if entertainer is the right word. I remember my mom being called by the teacher when I was in 3rd or 4th grade, and I'd gotten in trouble for the mortal sin of, this is going to sound very weird. I stood on my desk and I talked to my pencil. I'm sure I did it to entertain the kids around me. Like that was what I did. I still like to like make people laugh frequently, and I love to torture my kids with dad jokes and puns, and it's the way my brain's wired, so it just kind of, it's easy for me. But as for, you know, I guess what the second part of your question is, just curating cabinet and all of that. I'm an organized person, so I don't have a card catalog for a show, but I do have a spreadsheet, and we have a very long spreadsheet with lots of pages that help us. My researchers can put their story pitches in there, and then I read them, and my gut tells me whether it sounds like a cabinet story or not, and I give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. We log the stories that are told in each episode, so I can search that spreadsheet for, tell me the story about the croissant. Which episode was that in? Well, I can search the word croissant, and I can find that and tell you it was episode whatever, and you can download it, listen to it. We try to stay as organized as possible, and I knew if the show would run for a long time, we were going to need that, because with 2 episodes every week, each one having 2 stories, the number of dates and names and places and all the details were going to start piling up and becoming just unmanageable. So thankfully, we're pretty on it right now.
In one of the lore episodes, you mentioned the concept of cognitive dissonance. And I think that topic comes up more than once in lore, and it definitely applies to some of the Cabinet of Curiosities tales. Could you, just for our readers, explain the concept and maybe give your take on it and your perspective of how it plays into the stories that you're presenting to everybody?
I don't know that I could. It's because it's a squirrely concept. It's one of the things that we play with a lot on, specifically on lore. It pops up on Cabinet, but again, there's not enough runway on Cabinet to really go deep. On lore, we often really have to wrestle with duality in a lot of places. We have to wrestle with what these people did back then doesn't seem normal to us today, but if you understand the context and put yourself in their shoes, they were really doing something normal for them. And we, looking back, might look at them and say they were, they were barbaric or they were uncivilized, or we have become more advanced than them. But at the end of the day, they were just working with what they had. We're often dealing in the show with cognitive dissonance in the sense that I'm trying to get people to see things through a different lens than what they're typically going to use to view the world. And that's hard. It really is. It's like asking somebody to say, look, I want to tell you a story, but can I first rewire your brain entirely so that the story comes across differently? And there will be a handful of people that think that it's revisionist history in a sense. There will be a lot of people, though, who understand, like, oh, yeah, things happen within a bubble of context. And so first, tell me the context so I can understand what was going on. And then tell me the story, and it's going to make more sense. So when I deal with, I guess, what I would think of as cognitive dissonance, that's often what I'm dealing with, is like trying to connect the listener to this bigger idea through little idea stories and teach them along the way. I don't know if that answers your question, but that
Yeah, definitely.
that's,
I
yeah.
I was interested. It was an episode that basically it was the idea of somebody having an experience, like a divine experience, and then finding out that it was a hoax,
Mm,
still believing anyway. Like this betrayal of what you've always known, what your comfort is, what your religion is, and then having an experience that's either supernatural or not supernatural and then having to like reconcile the two. I just think that's such an interesting like human phenomenon, and either like
yeah.
fervently supporting your original belief just despite all the information in front of you, or going the complete opposite way and abandoning everything altogether. So I was just so interested to hear what your take on that.
Yeah. I mean, I will often have people ask me, do you think that these stories that you tell are true? And my answer is usually, I don't know if they're true or not. What I'm confident in, though, is that the people who reported, let's say, a ghost sighting or an unusual experience at a location, people who reported those firmly believe that they happened. They were convinced it was true. And so, at the very least, I believe these people and their passion and their conviction are true. But it does invite some cognitive dissonance where we, as a listener, have to say, well, I might be like 100% skeptic, but I'm hearing something here that it was, witnessed by 5 people and it was documented in 2 newspapers, and that seems like it was real, but that's inconsistent with my personal beliefs or the way that I approach the world. So again, I think that at the end of the day, like when you help people understand the context of a situation, it might get them through that cognitive dissonance a little bit better, where they can nod and say, okay, I'm open now. I'm willing to entertain that idea, but it's tough. It really is, because we as humans are very habitual, like stuck in our ways kind of people. I think what helps is that the people who listen to lore, like they're pulled in because they want to hear the weird stuff. So
Yeah.
So, were there any stories that you thought about including here first, but you later just felt wouldn't translate well to book form?
no, as far as what could be in a book, I think that anything that we've put out on the podcast could be in the book, because again, it begins as this thing that I create with my keyboard and my fingers. I see it as a document on the page. It just happens to be written in a voice that is easy for me to narrate, that I also think makes it easier for people to read. I think that rather than going for big academic ideas or using words that trip people up, the fact that I want to use a language and a narration on the show that's a little smoother and easier on the ears and on the mind. I think it helps people follow the story better. I often have to remind myself, people aren't taking notes while they listen to this story. They're not writing down an outline or dates and names. And so I have to be very careful with how many names do I introduce to them? How much detail do I throw at them? Because they're probably driving or they're, vacuuming their living room or doing laundry. Like I have to manage giving them enough and not giving them too much. And I think that makes for really readable story on the printed page. So, uh, I don't think there was any story that I looked at and said, nope, not going to work on the page, because in my brain, they all kind of started on the page to begin with.
We want to thank you so much for coming on here. This was so much fun.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it was a thrill to have you on, and we're excited to just watch that empire of yours grow because it's so great.
Well, thank you so much. This was fun. I really enjoyed the chat.
So, Cabinet of Curiosities, it's out in the world, right?
It is. It's out in the world. I've got a hardcover right here myself, but yeah, it's in Targets nationwide. So if it's easy for someone to pop into a Target, I know they've got copies in their book section, and I look forward to finding out how many libraries around the country start to get that on their shelves too. And it's
And
an
did not get
audiobook.
the audiobook. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, no, the audiobook is it's going to sound the most like the podcast, but what we did is we brought in a friend of mine named Dana Schwartz. She hosts a podcast called Noble Blood, which is also a history podcast. It's a history of royals and nobles who do weird and bad things, which is pretty much all of them. And she interviews me, it's so different for an audiobook. We did interviews in between the categories. So it was sort of like a way to decompress or to get ourselves from one room in the cabinet to the next room. And I really enjoyed that process of sort of talking with her to sum up a category and move on. So that's the audiobook format. It's really fun.
We love Dana. We actually had her on the show quite a few years ago, which doesn't see it was during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Which was quite a few years ago. But yeah, we had Dana on the show, and she is absolutely lovely, and her podcast is fabulous.
Yes, it is.
So once again, this was Jessica with Turn the Page podcast. My amazing co-host was
Melissa.
And our fabulous guest was
Aaron Mahnke.
And we are going to close this door on the Cabinet of Curiosities. And we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.